So here's Eileen. She's the neighborhood historian, and she's explaining westward expansion, manifest destiny, and the imposition of the Roman grid. And these people are like, no, Thomas Jefferson invented it. It's good. It's democratic. They told us in high school because it makes everything the same. As if becoming homogenous is somehow synonymous with political participation. All right, so she's like, actually, I'm sorry to tell you, but it's quite ancient. The grid is 5,000 years old, So everybody's pretty freaked out about that, and they're talking about where do people have more of a voice? And she's saying this place was laid out by developers and politicians. We were supposed to buy houses by working in their mills as they cut down the forest around us. We would cut down the forest in order to pay for our house, and they would be getting the money for everything. So she's explaining all of that and talking about villages. They're all talking about villages where people have village centers. And one of the kids at the meeting creates this model, and so the adults have used clay and popsicle sticks to mock up what they imagine could be something like a public square, because, as Eileen said, villages across the world have public gathering places at these points where paths come together. So people were saying, wow, maybe we could do that too. And at some point in the meeting, somebody actually said, if somebody put the grid over the lands of my ancestors, or our ancestors, by God, maybe it is time to put it back. Put the circle back. So we called the Department of Transportation and we said, we've got this really great idea. We've been looking at the city's goals for neighborhood around livability and calming traffic. We think we could accomplish those things. We want to make a proposal, a presentation to the city council. And Transportation said, absolutely not. That's impossible. That's never been done before. You can't do that. And besides, if we let you do that, the city council would get mad at us. And we're like, well, wait a second. We're obviously already mad at you. And they're like, well, that doesn't really matter, does it? Because we have the power and you don't. We're like, okay, let's just get this straight. We live here, and you never even come here. We live here every day. We watch our kids almost getting hit by cars a lot of the time. We worked for 35 years to pay down a mortgage to own one of these places. And you're telling us that at the end of all of that, we don't end up with anything in common? Like we have no voice even though we live here all the time and you don't? And they're like, yeah, duh. That's how it works. And we're like, okay, this whole thing is insane. We obviously know more than these people do about this whole situation. And the tea house had raised the issue for us. Like we obviously need a $65 tea house made out of trash and branches, brings together the community. All right. So we were pretty pissed off and we got demoralized too. And we were going into the elevator and the door was just closing. And at the last possible second, this super skinny guy slips in. And he's like, okay, I'm from Brooklyn. And we're like, okay, so what does that mean? And he's like, where I come from on the Eastern Seaboard, everybody, like all the kids know that the street is theirs. Because if you don't have the street, you don't have anything. So we're out there playing all the time. It's our turf. It's our place. And if you come through my neighborhood too fast, I will bust your windshield out with a baseball bat. And he's like, but I'm not saying do that to people. I'm saying on the West Coast, you guys have a problem. Because you all seem to think that this isn't yours. And actually during that meeting, it was the most famous thing about our work. During that meeting, one of the guys in the Department of Transportation actually did say, you know what, you guys got to give it up because that's public space and nobody can use it. You've heard that idea that we're really all confused and kind of a sick culture. So I'm confused. So we were pretty upset about all that, and then we listened to this guy in the elevator, and he's like, okay, I'm going to give you a permit to close the whole area, but it's not permission to to make any permanent changes. But he was in the meeting. So he's like, what you guys are talking about is so important that I'm going to help you to close the whole area, and you're going to have to work fast. But it's not a permit to do anything permanent, but it'll give you time. So we're out there painting the street. The night before we're painting, we plunked down all of these interactive structures on all the corners, like the 24-hour tea station here, the history station, this family-sized bench. We started to build a kids' clubhouse wrapped around the living tree, a poetry and art museum here, a 24-hour chalk station, all these trading places, a community stage, and a little library. And so we we were basically saying, we want to regrow the village heart, kind of like you would a garden, with seeds and starts, and then you kind of water it, you give it participation, and then it sort of develops and matures over time. That was our approach. So we're out there doing this, being criminals. Personally, if I have to break the law in order to be a villager, I will do it every single time. And actually, I've done that, along with other people, always with communities standing together. We've broken the law repeatedly, and nobody's ever even thought of arresting us, because what we're doing is manifestly good. So, beneficial. And that's what happened here. Ed, the gigantic policeman, comes driving down the street in his car, and he gets out, he stands up, and he's looking around, he's like, okay, what are you guys doing? And the kids are like, grab a brush, Ed, come on, paint the street, come on, Ed. And there's all these grandmothers and little kids, all generations, people from this entire area. Nobody's running away, nobody's trying to escape. And Ed's like, okay, I'm not going to report you, I'm just going to get in my car, transportation can deal with this. He backs away, drives away. He actually ends up working internally in the city to support this, and he goes on to become in charge of the entire southeast quadrant of the city. And then the transportation official that actually helped shepherd this through the political process ended up being in charge of the entire transportation bureaucracy after that. And I think it's interesting to sort of dwell upon for a while. But ultimately, this thing was legalized in a couple of months. Not just our intersection, but the city council actually passed an ordinance, and they said, today we approve the intersection repair ordinance, because we recognize, that United States has the highest incidence of strife, between people in a condition of social isolation of all first world nations across the board, all categories, and we have the lowest number of places to come together as communities. And so in approving this ordinance unanimously, we recognize that communities require a field for creative participation in their midst, and through repairing the intersection as a reflection of the community will repair itself. And then all 96 neighborhoods were enabled to do it to an unlimited number of street intersections for free. As a national model. So this becomes the first and only place-based form of government, self-governance in the country, which is a very remarkable thing as well. And I just want to point out that we have been fighting for a long time for this. Okay, so you're out here painting the street among all these people you're starting to get to know. People are already starting to employ each other, and each other's kids are watching each other's other kids. People are falling in love and putting up signs in their front yards about who's a naturopath, who does this or that. They're painting each other's houses. And then as we're out here having this potluck and the band is setting up to play, suddenly these 3 East Indian dancers from down the street show up and start dancing for the community. You don't know really who you live among until you have a social nexus like this in your midst. Gardens effervesce on all 4 corners. One of them, this gigantic permaculture installation. The kids' clubhouse intermittently becomes a kitchen. Somebody said, hey, I went to Spain once, and they had all of these chairs and tables on the edge of the piazza, so we built these out of driftwood. This whole thing has no budget, because everybody's got old cans of paint, pieces of plywood and boards, lots of idle hands. So they started to survey each other, who wants to remediate water on site, who wants to feed birds, who wants to take down fences, things like that. So here's an interesting thing. We had these, I'm going to go back. Here's the story of Steve and Brian. At the beginning of all this stuff, Steve and Brian were kind of peripheral, and they didn't really want to participate much, but they were known by everyone in the neighborhood for bringing their giant sound systems out and aiming them at each other's houses and trying to drive each other out of the neighborhood. And the rest of the neighborhood got upset and called Ed. And then Ed would come and say, put your toys away, guys. And then they'd bring them back out. So it was a big problem. So through this process of actually discovering that they had something in common after all, and the fact that the condo owners down on the waterfront actually attacked the whole project and tried to get the city council to change its mind, suddenly Steve and Brian stood together shoulder to shoulder to oppose the condo owners. They became public speakers and active participants in their community. They were brought out and then friends. And that actually inspired people to have a workshop. And the premise, or the question was, if Brian and Steve can become friends, could this all lead to world peace?